Sheri Fitts, welcome to the Fiduciary U Podcast. I'm so pumped about our conversation today.
I think this is the third time, right? We started the third time. I'm so excited. It's been a while, Josh. Yay!
It has. And, you're going to Burning Man next week. So I was hoping that this was going to be like the highlight of your week, but I'm okay with second place.
Yeah, this is pretty good though. This is pretty good. I was really looking forward to it. On Thursday though, I leave as I say to people, I leave the planet for 10 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Just make sure you come back, Sheri. Just make sure you come.
I'm coming back. I got it all planned. I got places to go. Trouble to cause.
That's it.
Right.
Conversations to facilitate. So you are somebody that we've known each other for a long time, but I've had just a tremendous amount of respect for you over the years, in terms of what you do, what you communicate, you just get it. I think it's awesome. I love seeing kind of powerful, successful women in the industry kind of, making noise and creating value. It's a lot of times people think of the financial services world as, it's more of a guy's world, but you have a really interesting background. You've done a lot. As we were prepping for this, we talked about, especially around technology, that you were 2 to 5 years early. But even your story of going back to the 90s and how you kind of fell into the industry and the things that you've done and the different roles and responsibilities. Why don't we start there? Why don't you give just kind of a brief recap of, how has Sheri Fitts gotten to where she is today? What's part of this of your journey and that story?
Yeah. Here's what I'll say. My father was a computer programmer in the 70s. So he had his own computer programming firm, in fact, in Eugene, Oregon. And then we moved from Eugene, Oregon to Corvallis, Oregon, where he went to work for a global engineering firm, C.H. Hill. Some people will know that firm. And I used to go with my dad and hang out with him when he would be programming the computer, which would be the size of my office right now. And I don't know if you ever saw those computer punch cards, Josh. Did you ever see those?
Right? I mean, I saw them on when I watch a documentary of Bill Gates.
Yeah. Well, I actually used to make holiday wreaths out of them, roll them in a cone shape, staple them, glue them, and spray paint them gold. Really,
your creative streak started your creative streak started early, Sheri.
Yeah. So I say that because what I'm really, I have a couple things to thank my father for. And one of them is I'm not afraid of technology. The other one is that I can rock a really good headstand, a la, in yoga. I'm a superb headstand. And the other one was he had me go to Toastmasters, the adult level Toastmasters in 8th grade. So I got into the world of design and graphic design in the early 90s when design was becoming computer aided design. So it was when to produce a newsletter, usually people would have to get a typeset, and then there were these things called blue lines, and this revolutionary software called PageMaker came out, and it changed everything. I'm sure that you've probably heard the term desktop publishing. So I came into the world of graphic design when stuff was changing, huge things were changing. People were going out of business and stuff was happening, right? And that was also the time, probably 4 years later, that I went to work for an investment consulting firm. And I joined because I was a single mom and I wanted to be able to have access to the financial services world and know what was going on. And so I brought my skill set of digital into that environment to create participant education and communication materials. That's how I kind of crossed over my design world with this financial services world. Fast forward to 1998, and those materials that we were creating, I was this de facto head of the department now because people had left and I had no salesperson. And it dawned on me, if we don't sell, we won't have a job, this team that I had. And so I got into sales. And that's how I got into marketing, was because I had a sales goal. And essentially I was selling to about 250 record keepers at the time, the second tier record keepers, regional banks, right? Folks who did not have an education and communication team embedded in their organization. And the thing that happened for me at that time was, it's 1998, I did not have a marketing budget. My boss was the kind of person who could just pick up the phone and call Phil Knight and say, yo, dude, he could call anybody. So he thought marketing was a bad word. And so no budget, sales goal. I just used digital. I just used what I had in front of me. So I started doing email marketing in 1998. Email marketing in 1998, because that's all I had, right? I had an email list. Isn't that funny though, Josh? Like, it's still an email list, by the way, open loop. An email list is the most valuable thing still that an advisor can have. So that's how I got into marketing, is always through the sales channel. And as a marketer, my favorite place to be is embedded inside a sales team. I love to sell. Sales is what makes things happen in an organization. People send me their kids who are getting a degree in marketing, and the first thing I say to them is, get a job in sales. Right? So that's how kind of I got to the world of financial services. I've worked for a provider here in Portland, Oregon. I've worked for an institutional consulting firm when I started. I've worked for a bank. I've worked for a large broker-dealer. And then in 2012, I got my AARP card in the mail in 2011. And
I don't believe it.
Phooey. Yeah. Well, I've just publicly announced in my newsletter that I'm 60. So 60. Let me just tell you this. I'm only halfway done. Right? I'm only halfway done. So, and I thought to myself, I've always wanted to be a speaker and do my own thing. And if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And so I left corporate America on purpose to start my firm. And I've, been in and out of commitments to my firm or, to the Borg. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Really reinvented yourself.
Yep. Yeah. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
That's what's cool about this industry is it does force us to reinvent ourselves on an ongoing basis. Because if the market doesn't do it for us, right, pull the rug out from underneath us, then, the SEC or the DOL or Congress, right, they do it for us, change things all around all the time.
And that's, I would say, one of the things that advisors don't realize is because these annuitized businesses, which are great, right? Recurring revenue, but it's easy to become complacent in our relationships. And, the reality is that, advantages get competed away over time. And I think this will tie into what we talk about through the rest of the podcast, but that, advisors in particular, if you're standing still, you're actually losing ground. And, a lot of, whether it's through being able to leverage things that allow you to stay, one or two or three steps ahead, but this continual evolution. And a lot of that is, if we think about like wisdom and kind of ancient wisdom, it sticks around, but a lot of times you have to put it in a different voice, a different narrative, a different approach. And one of your things is this digital EQ that you talk about, right? Which I think you say is the cross section between emotional intelligence and digital influence. So maybe talk a little bit about that. And it's very rooted in, I think, behavioral economics as well. My contention is that, that is the next, and partly it ties into like what I'm doing with Fiduciary RX now, which is really a platform to, visualize and gamify the retirement consulting process. And, you know, it's stories, it's narratives, it's our ability to communicate with people that ultimately is what captures their hearts and minds. And when we can capture the hearts and minds of people, now we can begin to drive influence and change. And we talk so much about being like delivering outcomes, but you know, you have to be able to visualize and really re-energize and reimagine and redefine what that looks like. And advisors need to stop resting on like, hey, I've got this relationship and it's going to be like this forever, and really start to push themselves to how do I, instead of standing still and losing ground, it's like inflation. Like I may put my money in my mattress. I don't feel like I'm losing money, but if inflation's going up, your purchasing power is losing. I think your influence, if you're not continuing to push up the envelope, you're actually getting like relational inflation that you're not aware
golly, of. I might have to use that, right? Damn. Yeah. Right, I'm glad you're recording this.
So talk a little bit about digital EQ. What is that?
Yeah.
Why do advisors, really anybody in our business, but especially advisors, why do they need to tap in and embrace this concept of digital EQ?
Well, let me just say also that I had a chance to hang out with you, I don't know, a couple of months ago after Napa, and we talked about your Fiduciary RX, and I was an immediate fan. And I love to find out what's happening in the industry, just because that's crucial to me as what you say about relational, inflation or whatever, what you just said. I want to know what's going on in the industry, because the more that I can stay in touch with that, the more valuable I am for my clients. And I loved Fiduciary RX for the perspective of how you have made it so elegantly simple. I think when I introduced you to a couple of folks on email, I think I used elegantly simple. And I love that. So back to the digital EQ component, you're absolutely right. It came from a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, which is very much how I process things. I actually think, in a former life, I quilted, because I feel like what I do all the time is take ideas and quilt them together to create something different. So digital EQ is emotional intelligence intersected with digital influence. And when you think about those two skill sets, they're like crucial for anybody to have right now. In particular, it's not you should have emotional intelligence. No, you must have emotional intelligence if you want to build a trusting relationship with your clients. I mean, trust
it's not simply a nice to have.
No, trust is our currency. Trust is our currency. And so having emotional intelligence, being able to understand, where you are as a being and, what emotions you're feeling. It doesn't mean you have to be feeling great all the time. It's just understanding where you are, but then also curiosity and empathy, and working to try to understand the person who's across the table from you or across the video monitor from you. Like, let's just up our empathy. So, and to your point, behavioral economics tells us over and over and over again, people make decisions based upon emotions. People make decisions based upon emotions. They do. Yet when we think about committees or even think about ourselves, we tend to forget that. We study, we learn, behavioral economics, and we apply that to participants, and we understand, the idea of trying to get people to save more and inertia and all of the things that get in their way. And yet those same concepts apply to us in our lives and our committee members and our vendors and whoever it is, and our spouses, right? Emotions drive decisions. We are not logical beings with an emotional tendency. We are emotional beings with a logical tendency every once in a while. So you take that emotional component, right? And then you think about where we are now. Digital influence. That's all the things, that's like as an example, social selling, LinkedIn. That's how you show up in the digital sphere across the camera from folks. That's what your website looks like. That's thought leadership. That's all the, if emotional intelligence is the inside, then digital influences the outside. And you have to have both of those.
I love that.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just continuing to beat that digital EQ drum. And it really came from a project of about 18 months ago or so, Josh. I started to think about rebranding because I hadn't rebranded since I started my business, yet what I was offering to the marketplace was a completely different. And, frankly, I was kind of probably hiding behind, an old brand. And so I started to try to really focus on what is it that I bring to the marketplace. And obviously digital is a component of, the drum that I beat for us to kind of use. But so is the emotional components and the heart component. So it just dropped in. I was walking the dog, dropped in. That's such a woo-woo term. I was walking the dog and I'm like, what is it that I do? I help people with their virtual intelligence. No, I don't. I help them with their digital intelligence. No, I don't. I help them with their digital emotional intelligence. Yes, I do. And that's how it happened. Yeah, that's how it happened.
And so talk a little bit about, and I love that iterative, you're a creator. I'm a builder, maker, creator. And I find that I follow a similar path that you do. It usually isn't just one eureka moment. It's usually an iterative process. It's like a refining process, and the ability to synthesize different streams together. And it sounds like that's, as you were walking the dog, and I would imagine it wasn't just, one 30-minute walk with the dog out on the trail. This was probably, took time and kind of refine, and till you finally hit that moment of like, oh, this is it. And then it's a matter of, okay, let's unearth more of like, what does that actually mean? What can advisors in particular, what does that process look like when you work with your clients, and what can advisors in particular do? Because there's this both inner work and outer work. You can have, and they need to go together. We talked about before we started recording is like, you can try the social game, but if you don't have some of the foundational, if you have a website that, is embarrassing, or you don't have some systems in place around email, you talked about like an email list is gold. If you don't have your email systems aligned with both what you're presenting to the world, but then how you stay connected in those relationships ongoing, you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. So what can advisors, like, how should they be thinking about this, like in really actionable real world? Like, how do you get in touch with your digital EQ, and what does it look like to implement that philosophy?
Well, so, the one thing, so Josh, I was speaking at a broker dealer retirement plan advisor conference last week, and I only had 50 minutes, but I wanted to kind of get to, I was actually doing a website review of 4 different advisor websites. But I wanted to lay some groundwork, and I didn't really have a lot of time. But what I said to them is, if I had all day, the first question I would ask you is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And in my mind, I think what happens is when we start a business, we got to have business cards. We used to need to have envelopes and letterhead. Don't know why, right? And we had a logo, and we did all those things that we think proves we're in business. Chances are we haven't necessarily looked at that in a long time. But the inside work, to your point, the inside work of asking yourself, why are you still in this industry? Why does it bring you joy? Why do your clients trust you? All of those kind of questions are actually really good questions to have, because if you go out into the digital world and start yapping and you don't have a really solid, almost like aligned brand or purpose, it's going to fall apart. So that's the first thing I think advisors need to do is, if I were to counsel anybody and everybody, it's take a couple hours and just remember why you're here. Like, remember, I know this is crazy, but your wife's a yoga teacher. Remember your dharma. Like, remember your purpose in life, right? Because then as you start to imagine what your business can be like and who you serve, then it all kind of comes together a little bit easily. And yes, to your point, I think when websites first started happening, right? I coded my first website in 2003. We just took our brochure, remember brochures? We used to have those. And then we just like stuck it on the website and made it electronic. And then that was that. Now a website is definitely more than that. And usually what happens is somebody's referred to you, they Google your name, and then voila, you are who Google says you are. And so, you know, a lot of advisors will sheepishly tell me their website embarrasses them, or their LinkedIn profile, don't look at my LinkedIn profile. And then I'm like, I'm the last person you should be worried about, but people are looking at that all the time and forming an opinion of you. Digital influence, they're forming an opinion of you. So you got to clean that up.
Yeah. There's you got to clean that up. They're going where they're spying on you, if you will, before you even know it. And, you know, that would be an interesting thing for advisors that say, I'm kind of embarrassed by my website or whatnot, is how many potential because everything starts with a conversation. How many potential conversations are you losing out on because that emotional reaction, that first time they checked you out, you know, it's kind of like, you know, what is it? I don't live in this world, but you know, the dating apps where you can swipe left or swipe right? If they don't like what they see, or I don't know which direction, if you don't like what you see.
Neither do I.
But whatever it is.
Somebody tell us.
Right, exactly. Is somebody swiping the wrong direction because their first impression of you didn't connect with them. It's not a 10-second rule. It's a 50 millisecond rule. 50 millisecond rule. Here's the fascinating thing about this. I love to geek out about this. Your optic nerve, by the way, goes straight to your reptilian brain because, right? We have to be able, we're visual creatures. We have to be able to know immediately if you're a tiger or if you're, you know, a teenager, right? Which both are just as scary depending on the time. But, you know, so people judge you even before they know they're judging you. And then they probably spend the time after that. I think the research is clear. They spend like after that, they will validate in their mind, like what their first impression was.
Right. Then they pull in their prefrontal cortex and then they kind of say, well, he's not for me because he's in Ohio. I only do business with advisors in Iowa or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So a website doesn't necessarily need to you know, look like Amazon or, you know, pick one, but it certainly needs to look like who you are and who you serve, for sure. And it just
help tell your story. You know, it's interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things, you know, at my prior firm that we did is, you know, when we co-founded the firm, like we had a set of core values, but we put in place in 2016 a strategic plan. We had an advisory board that we had since we started the firm, which was really valuable to us. And we'd gone through a period of a lot of growth and success. And in 2016, early 2016, we had an advisory board meeting and we were kind of like bringing everybody up to speed on, you know, what we had done. And they were like, this is great. Like, how are you going to continue? Like, where do you take it from here? And it was like the cobbler's kids had no shoes. we were like, well, we kind of think we're going to keep doing what we're doing. And they're like, well, what's your strategic plan? And we're like, we don't really have one. So the takeaway was like, hey, we need to develop a strategic plan. And we hired a really good consultant who kind of came in and helped us develop that. It was game changing for us. But one of the most important things he did was he led us through a process of defining our core purpose, which was why we existed, which we already had, but we had to refine it. And our core values. And we came up with these 5 really unique core values. Our core purpose was to improve lives by helping people make better decisions for themselves and those who depended on them. And so, whether that was a retirement committee that was making decisions for their company, but for their employees who depended upon them, or whether that was an employee who came into my office and they were having a personal issue and I could counsel them, or whether one of us was sitting on the board of a nonprofit and bringing our gifts and our abilities to help them impact, the constituency that they served. And we developed that core purpose. And then those 5 core values, which was, while the core purpose was why we existed, the core values were how we chose to live in, our firm and with the people that we served. And we came up with 5 really unique, kind of memorable, not just platitudes on a wall like integrity or excellence. We came up with things like love your neighbor, right, to serve others, and to master your craft, and or to have a bias towards action, or to own your stuff, to take responsibility. But what was so powerful about that is that then began, we weaved that into how we would talk about our firm and what we did. It transformed how we had conversations with employees. If for instance, I wasn't taking responsibility for something I did or did not do, somebody could have a conversation with Josh, you need to own your stuff. Or if somebody was being selfish, we could have a conversation around like, is that loving your neighbor? Are you putting the interests, really kind of the fiduciary story, are you putting the interests of that person, that client, that colleague, that business partner ahead of yourself and serving them, or is it the other way around? And it's just interesting. That got embedded in our website, that got embedded in our vernacular. It's how we describe what we do. Life-changing.
And I'm thinking probably, Josh, that probably got embedded in your pitches.
100%.
Right?
100%.
Because imagine how meaningful that is to a committee. I mean, we as human beings, we aspire to more. We just do.
Right.
And from a committee's perspective, if they have an advisor team that comes in and says, this is why we exist, this is how we serve, this is who we are, this is how we hold ourselves accountable, and this is how we hold ourselves accountable to you.
Yeah.
Like, this is how we measure ourselves and make certain that we're meeting our obligations to you and to your employees. Holy smokes. Committees are going to just like totally eat that up.
We used to call it keeping
our
promises and doing what we said we're going to do. We're making promises to you. It's our responsibility. And you're making promises to your people. So there's this mutual accountability. Mm-hmm. You need to hold us accountable to do what we said we're going to do. We need to hold ourselves accountable to do what we said we're going to do. But we're going to hold you accountable to doing the things that we know are actually going to impact and influence your people, that it's going to impact not just them, but generations of people that depend on them. It's a very different way. And I think the other element there is when you can do this, and again, this goes back to Fiduciary RX, but especially retirement advisors spend all their time looking backwards, as opposed to, I think you mentioned it a few minutes ago, people just in general, there's a huge market for self-improvement. Like, everybody wants to improve. They want to get better. And so advisors need to, instead of talking about what has happened in the past, it's more about beginning to cast vision around where the advisor wants to take their clients based on shared priorities and goals, and then present a very clear, actionable, repeatable, and demonstrable way of, here's how we're going to get you from where you are to where we want to take you based on what we've come to agreement with over time.
And that is a a crucial storytelling skill set that you just mentioned, right? Where you are now, where we can help you go. Where you are now, where we can help you go. That's a way of really bringing people into a story. Here's the one thing, though, that really struck me, Josh, is that by establishing early in your relationship with a plan sponsor, that as an advisor, you hold yourself and your team accountable in these ways, right? And this is how you're going to hold the committee accountable in these ways. In my mind, what that does is allow for different conversations. And not just constantly being worried that the committee's going to fire you, because you can point back to the agreement that you had on holding each other accountable based upon, who you are and how they hired you for that reason, whatever. In my mind, I feel like it changes the dynamic, and that no longer is the committee here and the advisor here, right? It's just that you're peers and you're working to serve their employees in a particular way, and how you all together are going to hold yourself accountable. So right. I think it's phenomenal. And to your point, vision, indeed. And bringing people along and sharing a story about what can be is an essential component of a really good finalist presentation. Right. And it's, it takes having some emotional intelligence to be able to kind of begin to learn the craft of storytelling, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. I mean, I'm a fan. I'm a fan of you. I mean, you got to say it at the beginning, but right back at you.
You know what else it does, which I think is incredibly powerful? The goal of business is not to work with everybody. The goal of business is to find the right people to work with. And so what this allows you to do as well is there will be prospects that don't connect with your vision, your story. And better to know that. Some of the greatest advice we got when we started our firm back in 2004 from a mentor of ours in the industry is he said, never take on a client, no matter how much they're willing to pay you, that if you get even an inkling that in 5 years, when they pick up the phone and try to call you, you're not going to want to answer. And so that really helped guide us as well in terms of, I want to know very early on in the sales process, do I feel like this prospect and I are closely aligned? Because if we're closely aligned, we'll make magic together. But if not, if I feel like they're not bought into what I believe or how I can help them, then we're going to be banging heads against each other. And it's not going to be like, one of the ways I try to live my life now is I try to categorize whether this is relationships, whether this is business, whether this is personal, whether this is activities I'm going to do. Is this life-giving to me, or is this life-taking? And there are clients that can be life-taking, and they are not worth it. The goal is as quickly as possible, find out those relationships that you feel like are going to be life-giving, and then double down on that. Don't try to sell the unsellable or convince the unconvincible. It's not worth it. You're probably not going to be successful. And I guarantee you that's not going to be a relationship that you want to invest in.
My marketing god is Seth Godin. Okay, my marketing god is Seth Godin, or as
you have better hair than Seth Godin. Let me just say that.
Seth Godin, yeah, he's got better glasses. So Seth Godin says in his book, which is, I love this book, The Icarus Deception, and essentially he says that people are afraid of flying too high because we've heard that myth that don't fly too high. The fact is that there were two parts to that myth. Don't fly too high. You'll get too close to the sun. Your wings will melt. You'll plummet to the earth and surely die. His father also told him, don't fly too low.
Mm.
Because your wings will take.
You never hear that part.
You never hear that part. Right. So Seth Godin tries to get people, listen, screw the don't fly too high. Fly as high as you want. Be as different as you want. You don't need a lot of people. I mean, and what he's trying to say is, I think the numbers of social make everybody think that you have to have a massive amount of followings and right? What you need, to your point, Josh, is you need clients that want to do good work alongside you.
Mm.
Right? That's what you need. And
that.
so be as different as you can be in order to scare people away, frankly. Right? I'm not, you know how people look like their dogs, supposedly, and I keep trying to figure it out. In fact, I saw this woman the other day. She was walking two adorable, tiny little curly, redheaded, you know, toy poodles, tiny little ones. They're adorable. And she just had kinky, curly red hair, you know, the kind. And I was walking my big beast of a Newfoundland who's sitting over there in the corner, and he's not barking yet. So that's very good. And I said, you know, I've often wondered what my similarity is to my dog. And they're like, whatever, lady. And I said, I think we're both acquired tastes. Right?
I love it.
I'm an acquired taste. And you know, and I'm okay with that. I wrote a blog post the other day. Are you lazy or are you liquid death? And liquid death is water, but their beer cans look like, their water cans look like beer. Anyway, phenomenal marketing on a number of levels. And my, you know, that same presentation that I was talking about, what I just want advisors to do is get gutsy enough with their marketing and branding to be exactly who they are and be super clear of who they want to do business with. And then that's all.
Yeah.
Right? Be different. It's totally okay. You don't have to appeal to everybody. And the people that do align with you will be yours for life.
Right. Yeah. You know, an interesting mindset is, and I know for myself, and even now, what I'm doing now is, you know, I have lots of conversations and, you know, prospective clients are obviously interviewing the advisor, but I would challenge advisors, interview your prospective clients, right? So and don't be afraid to say, you know what, I don't think I'm a great fit. I don't think I'm a great fit for you. And I know for me, we turned down a ton of business. In a lot of cases, I'd say, you know what, we're not a great fit for you, but let me try to help you find somebody that is.
Yeah. Usher them.
I'm happy to refer you to some other folks you probably want to have a conversation with. What was always interesting was that kind of changed, not that I did it on purpose, but it changed the dynamic. They'd be like, what do you mean we're not a good fit? Like it totally changed like the power dynamic. But again, going back to, I was interviewing my prospects as much, and even today, as much as they're interviewing me. And again, you can't convince the unconvincible or sell the unsellable. It's not worth it.
And you are judged by the company you keep.
Mm.
Right?
That's a great point.
That's what I told my son over and over again.
Right. I'm dealing with that with my teenagers right now.
Woohoo! Yeah. Yeah. You know, so really fast, we touched on something that I want to just kind of bring back so we don't forget about it, which is we touched on advisors, you know, websites, and we talked about kind of branding. We talked about mission and vision and value and purpose. And as a sideline, my purpose is to amplify the heart of financial services. My job is to get us to, frankly, love more people more often. That's my job, is to let financial services.
That's how you expand your influence.
Yep. My job is to let financial services out of this, this fiduciary trap we've put ourselves in, but more from a funds and facts and figures. And it's totally cool to begin to, you know, tell stories and share, you know, stuff about your personal lives and share who you really are and what, you know, just, we have so much shame and doubt and fear around money. People need more, they need more hope, and they need more guidance, and they need more transparency. So
do you think that vulnerability enhances?
Oh yeah.
Do you see vulnerability and authenticity as a superpower and not a super weakness?
I see it as a superpower. I see it as a superpower. Unfortunately, I feel like sometimes, and I'm sure you see this, Josh, people do they do the vulnerability hack on LinkedIn to try to get eyeballs. And to me, just doesn't, if I can smell that I'm being manipulated, I won't do it. But if you look at my LinkedIn About section, I talk about why I'm in financial services and talk about my upbringing and a variety of other things. I think vulnerability begets vulnerability. The more that we can share who we are, the more that allows other people to share who they are. Yeah.
And isn't that really where you start to get down to kind of like, and that's the interesting thing. You mentioned something before, like the data and the information and the analytical. Most advisors feel really comfortable with facts and figures and spreadsheets.
Yep.
And, you know, and in the private wealth world, it's become much more prevalent. But this kind of concept of like life planning, you know, that it's more than just the facts and the figures and the numbers. But if you can really, and people are very guarded about, you know, about money for a whole host of reasons, their upbringing, how they were raised, you know, experiences that they've had, and that shapes what their relationship with money. I have a very good friend of mine who you know, heads up an advisory group with a successful RIA in North Carolina. And his name's Tim Maurer, and has written a couple of books, but he talks about the concept of personal finance. He said, you know, personal finance is much more personal than it is finance. But I do think advisors need to be more willing and more open and have more tools to be able to help facilitate that vulnerability with their clients. Because if you can build that trust to get them to begin to open up, now you can start to get somewhere, and you can start to move them.
And here's the deal. I know me some wealth management advisors, and they help people raise their children and bury their parents. They have different relationships than I think we have in the 401k world. Why is that? Why can't we have that same relationship with participants? Now, granted, how do you scale vulnerability? Sure. That's a good one. That's a good question. But here, I'll give you an idea. The next 401k meeting, when you're in there and you want to start talking about the tax benefits of saving in a 401k plan, stop right there and ask that individual to turn to the individual next to them and tell a story about somebody they knew in retirement.
Yeah.
That would change the conversation and the energy of the whole meeting right there. Because there'd be some people who would have successful people, and there'd be some people who would have sad stories. And that's okay, and that's good, and they could share those. But it gives them some context about why they're doing this instead of just tax savings, which is not really a good reason anyway, based upon, you know, taxes. So
in those meetings with clients at times, one of the things I used to do, because I was big on aggressive plan design, and you know, the way I would describe it was, look, we need to engineer this plan in a way that the least of your people doesn't run the risk of throwing a gutter ball with their retirement savings. And I would ask them, I would say, you know, and you'd get pushback at times around like, you know, I feel like it'll be imposing, or it feels heavy-handed, or it feels very paternalistic or maternalistic. But one of the questions I would ask is, each committee member, think about your company. Who is the least sophisticated financially in your company? Think about that person. Do you have them in your mind? You don't have to say their name. And all of them would say, yeah. And I would say, what can we do to make sure that we design this plan in a way that helps that person not throw a gutter ball? And it was powerful because it's interesting. And in the culture that we're in right now, you know, there are issues and there are people, right? When you talk about issues that are faceless, it's very easy to paint things with a really broad brush than if somebody's sitting right in front of you from a personal level. And being able to kind of connect with that, I think is important. You're right. You do have private wealth. There are ways that the retirement advisory industry is more advanced, especially around embracing some behavioral economics.
Yep.
But I will say that from a relational engagement, private wealth advisors, like these, you're right, these relationships, they run deeper because it's hard to scale trust. And like you said, how do you scale that to 1,000 people that I'm not going to be able to have like one-on-one conversations like you and I are having? Whereas, on a private wealth, if you get 50 or 100 individuals you work with, you've got a
good
business.
By the way, let me just tell you something that you did, right? When you asked the committee to think about another individual and began to kind of picture them in their mind's eye, and then ask them questions about that particular individual, what you did was you got them out of their prefrontal cortex and you got them into their limbic brain. You took them out of their logical brain and put them into their emotional brain.
I didn't know that.
It's brilliant, because then what you're doing is you're shifting where they, it's almost like you're just shifting where they're accessing parts in their brain, which allows them to be able to kind of feel things differently. That was just brilliant. And it also kind of did another hook from the storytelling perspective, because essentially what you're doing is asking them to just lean into or feel into another individual and begin to tell a story in their mind about that individual's success or failure as it related to their 401k plan. Anyway, very good tactic. Replay that, people. Back up and replay what Josh just said.
It's interesting too. You know what it does? Those committee members will feel less responsibility for a plan. They feel a much heavier responsibility for people. Yep. And so I hear this from advisors over and over again, is, trying to get their committees to actually kind of own their responsibility.
Yep.
One of the things we've talked about in the past, one of my philosophies is I'm a big believer in that the words we use matter, because, words, influence our thoughts, and our thoughts shape our beliefs, and ultimately our beliefs
words matter.
The words matter. The words we use influence our thoughts. Our thoughts shape our beliefs, and our beliefs drive our behavior. So if you can and this is why that capturing the hearts and minds of those committee members, and to really get them to own and embrace and start to be accountable and responsible, and recognize the decisions that they make have consequence and they have impact for people, people they can see and they can imagine, people that report to them, or that they see in the, the lunchroom and, maybe eat their lunch next to. That responsibility, if you can capture that within them, you can use that in order to get them to do the things you're recommending that they do.
Well, here's the thing. The next time you have a finalist presentation and you find that it's going to be across this virtual, divide that we have, instead of beginning to introduce yourself and your team and perhaps maybe you could stop for a minute and do just exactly what Josh did, which was say that, before we get started today, I just want to center this conversation on the participants, because that's what this is all about. So just, find an employee that you interact with on a regular basis. Find somebody and, do what you just did, Josh. Ask people to picture that individual in their mind's eye. And what it does in advance of the conversation about, the funds and the details about the plan and the et cetera, what it still does is it helps that person center in their emotional center, which is the place they make decisions from. So if you can start the meeting in that manner, then the rest of the meeting can really be yours to win, frankly. right? Even across this digital divide, doing something like that gets the committee all on one page and really gets their hearts and minds directed toward the right place. Yeah.
That's great advice. That's great advice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does a typical engagement for you look like?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that people work with me. First off, I'm a speaker and a trainer. So I do a lot of work with sales teams, with advisors, with broker-dealers, and, a variety of other organizations, all underneath the digital EQ kind of, umbrella. So that could be anywhere from storytelling to LinkedIn or, any component associated with emotional intelligence and digital influence is what I speak and train about. So that's the first thing. The other thing is that a couple times a year, I do something called Operation Amplify. And that is a chance for folks to spend 3 days with me, beginning to look at how to create a thought leadership platform. And what does that mean? And how do you do it? And how do you execute it? And more importantly, how does it lead to more opportunities for conversation and relationships? So that's called Operation Amplify. And then people who have gone through Operation Amplify can be part of an ongoing mastermind group that I have going, where we meet once a week and we stay focused on a variety of different things. Like for 1 month, all I did was, map out what does it mean to have an active email marketing kind of campaign going. And then the other month we talked about storytelling. And then the other month we're talking about sales. So it's usually one of those three things: training, speaking, my 3-day kind of Operation Amplify class that I do, or doing mastermind with me. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
What one of the things I like to ask guests is, and typically it's around, fiduciary, but like, what's your, for listeners and for advisors specifically, what is your single best piece of advice for them?
I think I already gave it, but I'll say it again. Spending some time to get super clear on your purpose, like really clear on your purpose. And it's like an onion. I mean, I think the more you ask yourself that question, the more you begin to discover what it is. And then it just keeps kind of evolving and evolving and evolving. And the more that an individual can get clear on their purpose, then the more that path becomes clear to them.
I think that's great advice. Where can people go to connect with you? If they want to learn more about what you do, if they want to follow you and follow your thought leadership, what's the best way for people to do that?
So you can find out about me at sherifitts.com, my brand new rebranded fabulous website, sherifitts.com, or you can find me on Instagram. I mean, not Instagram. On Instagram, you can follow me because there'll be pictures of hearts and then paddleboarding. So there's that, or my dog, or you can find me on LinkedIn. It's usually where I rant a little bit. Yeah.
You do a lot of LinkedIn lives, I've seen.
I do LinkedIn lives.
What's been your experience with that?
I think our industry needs to be trained on how to interact with lives, because lives are an opportunity for the audience to kind of participate in the conversation a little bit. And I think, it's funny, if I put out a thing that I'm doing a webinar, I have quite a bit of people who come and participate in the webinar. But if I put out a thing that I'm doing a live, it's a little bit less well attended, I should say. So I think I'm early to the game on LinkedIn Lives for our industry. I think 2 to 5 years is usually how early I am. But what I'll say, Josh, is the act of doing LinkedIn Lives has allowed me to just continue to up my technical game from a digital perspective. So They're fun. They're a way for me to raise my technology bar for sure.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, Sheri, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I have tremendous respect for you, and I know the audience is going to get a ton out of this. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I just want to tell you, how much I appreciate you and your willingness to come on and tell your story, and to be vulnerable, but also to give just really, really good, actionable advice. I'd encourage anybody listening, especially advisors, reach out to Sheri, connect with her, learn from her. It'll be good for your business.
Well, okay. So I get the last word here,
okay.
Josh, which is that I really am excited by what you're building. I am super excited by what you're building and the ripple effects that you're creating for the health and wellness, right? And just the way that you're allowing people to visualize their 401k plan in a way that they hadn't before, and the changes that will take place as a result. I just think it's really exciting, and I'm so happy for your success. And so if you haven't checked out Fiduciary RX, then you should do that for sure as well. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that little commercial, Sheri. I greatly appreciate that. So
cool.
Let's wrap up, but I want to tell you to have fun at Burning Man. I would imagine you're probably going to have some insights that come out of that probably when you're on a higher plane or higher level, that you'll be able to kind of come back and continue to, enhance the great work you're doing. And I'll make sure in the show notes and everything that I put how people can connect with you. So thanks so much for being a guest. It's been a great conversation.
Sweet. Thank you.